Generally speaking, when I dislike an anime, it's never specifically because of the ending. In fact, I actually hate it when people make the argument that a show or anything was ruined by its ending. I often hear about this when people talk about Erased or FMA 2003, and even if these shows had bad endings, which they don't, they're actually perfectly fine in my opinion, they don't take away from the rest of the show and what it did right. And the same can kind of be said about Kokodo Connect, but now whenever I think back on the events of the show, I go through chest pains, fatigue, and dizziness, and I can't even breathe right. If I was stupid, I would say I was going into cardiac arrest, but I'm not, so I know it's because it's just that bad of an ending. It's one of the few endings to an anime that actually does ruin the entire anime for me. Now, while I hate the last 4 episodes of the show with a burning passion, the other 13 episodes weren't exactly perfect either. I definitely wouldn't say I had a bad time watching, but I also wasn't really having a good time. You know, it was alright, but it was redundant and the characters weren't fleshed out that well. The 3 arcs in the first 13 episodes come off as extremely unfocused as a result. The first arc revolves around our 5 main characters swapping bodies with each other randomly, and the second arc makes our protagonists unleash their innermost desires whenever they want to or not, while the third arc turns a random member of the gang into a child at set times. Throughout all of these arcs, it always feels like the writers only really care about telling one story, and that's a character-driven drama placing emphasis on the most important character by far, Nagase Iori. The development given to the rest of the characters isn't nearly as thoughtful or emotionally compelling. The character arcs always seem rushed and are often lacking a satisfying resolution because of that. The worst example of this relates to this character named Inaba, so her whole deal is that she has trust issues or something. She reveals to all of her friends that she can't even bring herself to trust in them. This problem that she brings up is resolved when Taichi, that's the main character, tells her that he's, done dirty things with himself with her in mind, and you'd think that this would, if anything, make her trust issues worse, but apparently that's what she needed to hear. Why? I mean, how would this... You know what? Never mind. It's stuff like this that's the problem with Kokodo Connect. They introduce a problem that this character has, and they resolve it in a quick and oftentimes poorly done manner. This is in part due to the structure of the show. There's no problem with having a lot of characters, but rather than focus on one character at a time, like how Bunny Girl Senpai or Steins Gate handles its characters, this show decides to balance multiple different characters' emotional baggage in one arc. I wouldn't have a problem with this if it was done well, but it rarely is, which leads to some characters not bringing much to the table in comparison to others, making them feel pointless. As a character, Nagase suffers from the same problems as the rest of the cast, but it's usually to a much lesser extent. Her whole deal as a character is that she doesn't really know who she is, like she's literally made so many identities which she uses in different situations to appease the people around her. This was mainly caused by her abusive father. She's pretended to be someone she's not for pretty much her whole life, and as a result, she's forgotten her true identity. Now, normally, having someone monologue about what makes her interesting as a character is a bad way to show what makes this person tick, but the robotic tone that Nagase uses in the scene to describe her life makes an otherwise dry exposition scene pretty unsettling, and it's also pretty disturbing to see her acting so differently from her usual peppy self. Anyways, by the end of the show, Nagase pretty much accepts herself as she is now to be her true self, and she also manages to improve her family situation. Now that we got that out of the way, this is where we talk about the ending, which coincidentally happens to be about our favorite character, Nagase, which, as we all know, means that we're in for the best that the show can offer, right? Well, here's why I fucking hate this ending. There are 2 main problems with this final arc. 1, there's no point to it. I hate it when anime does this thing where they dedicate an arc to a character learning some lesson, but then they say that the character didn't really learn their lesson, so they make another arc basically doing the same thing as last time, and that's exactly what Kokodo Connect did with its finale. It's redundant, and the only reason why this was made was to keep the show going. Try to go for a really artsy ending and switch the main love interest for the main character, and don't worry, we'll get back to that. The second major problem with this ending is that it pretty much invalidates the rest of the show, since the main point of this arc is to redo the whole finding my true self thing. This essentially means that everything that Nagase did and said throughout the rest of the series was complete fucking bullshit. Ever since this arc started, she's been acting all emo and depressed, and she's totally different from before. She eventually reveals that everything she's been doing throughout the rest of the anime was just like we thought, all an act, and that may not sound like too big of a problem, but Nagase did so much to affect the story of the show, so let's just go over a few of them. There was a point in time where Nagase was about to die, and she was saying her goodbyes to all of her friends through different bodies. So were these tears of pure sorrow a complete act? Was her valiant and brave decision to sacrifice herself to save her friends just her pretending so that her friends would think of her in a good light? This just muddies the message of a lot of the things that Nagase did and realized throughout the show. So yeah, redundancy and bastardization of the rest of the show aside, it also doesn't help that Nagase is being a massive B-word about all of this, and because of how repetitive and pointless this all is, I'm just infuriated while watching. And you will not believe this shit, but unintentionally or not, the show straight up tells you that this whole thing was a waste of time. After everything is resolved in a really cheesy way, a bit of time passes and we see how Nagase changed from all this. Now, you'd think that she'd be a lot more honest about her true self and she would act completely differently from how she was before, since she admitted that the rest of the show was all an act. But what we actually got was her going back to normal. And by normal, I mean that she regresses back to how she was throughout the rest of the fucking show. She's exactly the same as how we saw her before, even though she made such a big deal about not being her true self and how she went all emo for a while and tried to do this deadpan no emotion shit that pissed me off so damn much. She didn't actually change how she acted. These last few episodes somehow managed to both invalidate the rest of the show as well as itself. This was pointless because I guess the Nagase we've been watching was actually the real Nagase the whole time. Remember how I talked about the show switching love interest for the main character? Well, it's about time we talk about Inaba. Inaba is the one who started dating Taichi after all of this, and listen, I like this pairing, and I think that Inaba is a better fit for Taichi than Nagase ever was, but when they got together at the end of the show, it left a bitter taste in my mouth. And that's because it wasn't earned at all. It just comes out of nowhere. Taichi is in a coma for, it's not really worth explaining, and he has a hallucinatory dream of Nagase talking to him, where they talk about how they were in love or something, and then when Taichi wakes up, Inaba is there and he just asks her out. This just happens randomly, when throughout the rest of the show, Taichi remains very adamant about his love for Nagase. It could be because Taichi fell out of love with Nagase after everything that happened in this arc, but that just makes it seem like Taichi is a really shallow person and just moved on to the next best thing. It fucking sucks and it feels rushed to hell. And from how it's presented, it's clear that the writers wanted to go for a really artsy and moving ending akin to things like Clannad, After Story, or Your Name, but it just feels like a bunch of meaningless and cluttered rambling. I hate how everything gets wrapped up, I hate how none of this was necessary, and the show inadvertently confesses to that, and I absolutely hate how the main couple gets together in the end. And because of all of these things, this ending is terrible and made me regret watching the entirety of the show. But yeah, that's all I wanted to talk about, and thanks for watching.